Special Operations Training Detachment, SOD West, Burro Team. Coming at you from NTC, Off the Radar.
This is Off the Radar. I'm Captain Weston Rich, an observer coach trainer for the Green Berets at the National Training Center. Today, we are going to talk about the targeting and fires process, how it has changed since the Global War on Terror, and what it looks like today, as well as how Special Operations Forces integrate with conventional and joint forces regarding the targeting and fires process.
Sergeant First Class Dillon Luedtke, as you've said before. From my background, I grew up in a military family. Originally from Fort Bragg, North Carolina. My dad was an artilleryman. Grew up most of our time over in Europe with the 173rd, and he was over in Afghanistan most of that time. But then once I got to college, he went back up to Bragg, and he retired as a CSM out of 82nd. But my whole upbringing was in the artillery world and the airborne community, so this is just where that passion's kind of driven and helped put me in the place I am now. I am an 18 Charlie. I was originally at 3rd Special Forces Group. Came in as an 18 X-ray in 2017 after graduating from the Citadel. Got to group at the beginning of 2020. And then I spent the next 4 years having an incredible ride on the same team. Had a lot of great experiences, got to go overseas. While I was on my team, I did an Afghan rotation at the beginning. It was 2020, so take that for granted. And then I did 2 training missions to Africa. And then between the 2 training missions, I got to work at just sort of Somalia for several months. And then Army told me to come out here to NTC a little over a year ago, and been out here since as an OC. And with the fire stuff, it's just been an opportunity that has been given to me. SOTD's allowed me to go to these courses to gain this education from the Joint Firepower course at Nellis Air Force Base and the Joint Operational Fires and Effects course at SIL. So just been an incredible opportunity since coming out here.
Right on. So some background, at least in the schoolhouse side of working with our joint partners or the joint force going through the schoolhouse at Nellis Air Force Base, and then with the conventional force at the home of the field artillery at Fort Sill. But before we go into all that, you did fail to mention that while you were on a team, you came out and trained at NTC. And I actually was your OC for that rotation. So
you know what? I did fail. I'm sorry. Yep. So actually about, I think 4 months prior to coming out here, I came out here with 3rd Group as part of the RTU. So awesome experience being able to be on both sides of the house. It's helped make me as an OC better. But yes, and then you, of course, sir, were my lead OC. So
yeah.
As we were getting blown out of our patrol base one time.
Yes. Well, I also remembered you had a fuel tank get punctured, and you're like using a chest seal or something to try to seal up the 1.1 fuel tank or something out in the desert.
It's 18 Charlie doing 18 Charlie things.
Yeah, field expedient maintenance. But that's not what we're here to talk about. We're talking about fire. So maybe you could shed some light on if you were in the targeting process as the team senior Charlie, or if you've just gotten more involved in targeting as a observer coach trainer since you've been part of Special Operations Training Detachment.
So I would say that maybe not as much as 18 Charlie, the targeting and fire stuff. It's more of just the things I've seen out here as an OC, kind of from the start of doing our first rotation when we were down at JRTC last year. I just kind of saw this common theme, and it's continued across like all the rotations, is that just targeting and fires integration seems to be a common struggle with every RTUs, of not necessarily understanding how deliberate targeting looks, how targeting looks in a LSCO environment where we aren't the main effort of the fight. And so that's just kind of what's driven me towards, gaining an interest in trying to educate myself on this so I can help give back to RTUs and allow them to kind of see the bigger picture of things, because it's very, very not closed-minded, but a lot of RTUs struggle to conceptualize targeting in the bigger picture.
Yeah. Okay, so from observations and as an OC, have you had several teams come out with a attached JTAC or a SOTAC qualified individual on their team? Or like who's doing the targeting on a detachment in your experience?
So within the detachments, it's usually been, the Fox is driving the targeting as the intel sergeant. But, what they learned in the schoolhouse, after having conversation with them, they don't go very much into that because it's more IPB focused.
Yeah.
So, they have some understanding of like some of the basic targeting products, like your HPITL, and they're doing that, and they're working in conjunction with the JTAC or SOTAC they have with them. But again, it's all still very the tactical level and not seeing as them being a strategic level asset to the division or corps' deep fight is how are we actually going to be doing our targeting for LSCO to actually meet effects that they want.
Yeah.
So it's like, they'll do IPB, they'll do that really well, they'll develop their NAIs, so on and so forth, and then they'll have like a HPITL built, but it doesn't go past that, that's like step one of your targeting like products that you would make at like a detachment level or an AOB level. And it's just almost like we've made our own HPITL, but this is what we thought was the HPITL, and not really thinking as a supporting effort, what does the brigade's HPITL look like, or what does the division's HPITL look like? Because those are going to be the people you're asking for assets when those TACPs or JTACs submit 1972s or try to work things through their processes with the air component, trying to get dedicated stories on air tasking order, those sort of things. That's where it kind of stops. It doesn't get to that point where they're actually doing that integration.
Yeah. Well, through a conversation I had recently with Major Ficken, the high priority target list, like the detachment should be making their own, but it should be based off of the higher units HPITL. But in reality, they can't affect all the things that are on the division HPITL. They have to figure out what they're going to be able to affect and like really hone in on those things.
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah.
And that's why it's so critical that L&O packages or liaison packages from SOF grow and have better relationship with whoever the RTU is from conventional forces. While it's kind of an awkward thing at a CTC because it's a brigade level exercise, and they might have like a small division element, but they don't have like full staff. So a lot of those processes that are done at that level where we first meet conventional and the ComRel, it's not done out here, or it's notionally done. So it doesn't provide forcing functions to SOF to actually integrate themselves, prior to coming out here.
Okay.
And be a part of the MDMP, or excuse me, military decision-making process, with the division or the brigade that's coming out here. Because if they're able to be there at that point, then it will allow them to like show, hey guys, this is what we as SOF can provide to you in this fight, in this rotation. And this is how we can achieve effects on targets that you guys are prioritizing, and allow them to incorporate that in the planning versus, we get out here at execution and it's like, all right, go out in the box and do great things for God and country. And it's kind of all just in limbo as far as the requirements to support the brigade.
So at the detachment level, they've hopefully have their HPTL. What other targeting products as an OC are you coaching them to create?
So all the targeting products we would like to see them have would be, number one, the HPITL. That's going to be your first one. There's kind of an acronym, HATS, that I learned in the Joint Firepower course to help me remember this. And this is all pulled from your Army doctrine targeting methodology. But it's going to be your HPITL, your attack guidance matrix, which your attack guidance matrix is going to be the product that says, these are the type of targets we have by priority, and these are the desired effects that we want to achieve on these targets, whether it's, SA-22s or it's, GLOCs or ground lines of communication. Or sustainment nodes, something like that.
Okay.
But that's when you build the attack guidance matrix, which then helps you and allows you during your weaponeering phase to decide what do I have asset-wise to support my operations, and what can I use to achieve the best effect, or based off the desired effect, and incorporate effectiveness of munitions. And there's just a lot of strategic planning that goes into that. Now, obviously, at a detachment, their stuff's going to be very vanilla, because this is talking division level.
Yeah, well, they have limited resource. Everything, organically, they have very few things compared to a division or a Siege SOF level entity.
But they still can build the product. And for them as a team internally, what are my options to achieve effects? Well, I have lethal and non-lethal capabilities. We could just go do a kinetic strike and just from standoff munitions. That would be a possible solution. Or I sabotage this with, demo or use of surrogate forces or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So you can build your own. It's just not going to be as in-depth and not include I have armed ISR, I have, HIMARS, ATACMs, things like that.
Yeah.
So that would be the second document or product. And then the third one would be your target selection standards product, which that's just going to be more into once you decide or once you start getting to the assets, more surface to surface fires.
Yeah.
What your target location error is going to be, or just engaging the threat so that you engaging the targets, and what it's going to look like as far as distances, minimum safe distance, things of that. I'm not going to speak too much more on that because it doesn't sound very intelligent. Some artilleryman's going to hear this and be like, that's whatever.
Yeah.
But so anyhow, the last document would just be the target sync matrix as a whole, which this would be your final product of a targeting cycle, and using the Army methodology of decide, detect, deliver, and assess. By each phase, these are what my assets I have as either sensors or effectors or delivery platforms, and sensors for assessments for each one of my targets that I've been planning.
All right. Awesome. Well, appreciate that. Detachments in the future, you're going to get coached on developing those 4 products during your targeting cycle. So moving on, what's kind of changed in our recent past of global war on terror versus our large-scale combat scenario that we have at the combat training centers in terms of targeting and fires?
Some of the biggest changes is just understanding that, during GWAT, we were the main effort of the fight. Mm-hmm. We drove our own targeting. We had assets dedicated to us for dynamic targeting at all times, and we could be rapidly dedicated assets throughout the entire battle space to achieve effects because it wasn't a contested environment in the air. And the thing that's different now is that now that we're in LSCO, we are not the main effort to this fight. We are the supporting effort, and the assets we're requesting and using are coming from, a division or corps, or from the air component or maritime component. And the thing we have to understand is everything we do targeting-wise for this fight, it has to nest with the division or the land components, or the air component or the maritime component, nest with their priorities based off the effects they're trying to achieve to meet the Joint Force Commander's objectives.
Yeah.
So it's not just, we can't just come out here and just do our own thing unilaterally without making sure that we're actually helping support the operation and not causing more stress.
Yeah. So there's a resource competition across the board from all of the components that are out here, in the large-scale combat scenario. And if you are trying to compete for those joint resources or combined resources, you have to understand the priorities of that upper level entity that controls the resources and be able to message that effectively.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yes. I would say, though, before we move any past this, the one thing that I would never want to argue or intend to argue is that everything we learned during GWAT as far as targeting, we should get rid of.
Oh, no, absolutely not.
Because there are certain parts of the world where dynamic targeting is still a thing because it's still a persistent coin fight. Mm-hmm. Third group obviously has a lot of experience with this in places like East Africa where it's still a continued thing. And I just think that that's a thing we have in our tool belt that we should still practice and maintain.
100%.
And then this is just something to add to our tool belt as well as a new means of targeting and fires.
No, for sure. Like, you come out to a combat training center, you're presented with a large-scale combat scenario, and as a special operations force, it's actually not that different. There are differences, but the base principles of all the training that you've received apply to the scenario, and you should be able to adapt them to the scenario. But to your point, Dylan, like, absolutely, like, special operations lethality is about being able to execute the entirety of the spectrum of operations across the force, and being able to go do counterterrorism, counterinsurgency, foreign internal defense, or direct action, special reconnaissance, et cetera, et cetera. And some of those things can be presented throughout the large-scale combat scenario.
Mm-hmm.
But, just because it's not presented as a regular warfare or unconventional warfare doesn't mean you can't use those principles and apply them to this scenario and be successful.
Right.
So, and including with targeting, like, we have had the ability to have more, at times, dynamic targeting, especially like at the initial start of the scenario. It is either a completely denied or heavily contested airspace environment, and towards the end of that, there's a change in the environment where the SOF and the conventional forces have done so much that it's maybe still contested, or in certain areas it's not contested, and we own the airspace, so that it opens the ability for us to do more kinetic, traditional, or global war on terror style targeting.
Right.
Awesome. Let's talk about deliberate targeting, since we kind of talked a little bit about the differences or what is expected now, but like, what does that actually mean? What does a team or a company have to do in order to be effective when you're operating in the large scale combat environment and it's contested airspace, or it's denied semi-permissive environment, whatever the situation they're in is?
As far as like deliberate targeting and stuff?
Deliberate targeting.
So I'd say the biggest thing is just that, and this, again, most of this, like, we can discuss, detachment level, stuff like that, but a lot of the things that really makes the difference for the targeting and fires integration for this fight is just at a much higher strategic level or operational level. And I think it's important that the tactical level understands this, because that's what we have out here as RTUs, and they're the ones who are trying to facilitate it. But anyhow, to answer your question, so the thing is that makes it so different is that if you look at how a division or corps is doing targeting during LSCO, they're working on a 96-hour targeting cycle window, which means in any given day, they're making assessments of yesterday's fires and execution. They're in the execution of today. Tomorrow, they're doing like their final conditions checks and final preparations for execution tomorrow. And then 2 days from now, they're doing the meat and potatoes of the targeting cycle, the weaponeering, things of that, the ATO cycle, the air tasking order cycle, to get everything ready for that day. And then, then 3 days out from now, they're doing their target nominations for that targeting cycle period. And the thing that makes it deliberate, and the thing we have to understand, is that the RTUs, when they do their targeting, that they're having to make intel assessments based off of how the enemy is reacting so far in the fight, what phase of the operation they're in. They have to make the assessment of, I assess 3 days from now, these are going to be the priority targets that we need to take out or achieve effects on in order to continue the operation successfully. And the thing that we see with the soft side of the house is that because they don't necessarily grasp a 96-hour targeting cycle window, because they've just never been sensitized to it or taught about it or anything, so they don't understand that, like, how important it is for that probably 18 Fox on the team, to make those assessments based off of what's happening, what the SIPCOP looks like, what LNOs are reaching back to the AOB and to the down reps of what they're doing, so that they can help actually make the analysis and say, I assess in 3 days from now, these are our priority targets, because based off what I know from the division or corps, these are the targets that we want to achieve effects on to support them.
Yeah.
And that's just the biggest thing that we have to work on out here, and just help people conceptualize why they're out here.
Yeah. So in our scenario, detachments infill, ahead of the conventional force pushing to their initial forward line of troops, and when they get into contact with the conventional unit. So the detachments leave, anywhere from 24 to 72 hours prior to the conventional units doing their first maneuver, and they're going to have potentially targets, or they're going to do things to enable the conventional force. So how do they integrate with that targeting cycle, and actually once they're on the ground, and they see something, whatever it may be, a communications node, a logistics node, integrated air defense system or something and they want to do a kinetic strike on it, how are they getting into that deliberate targeting cycle?
So this is kind of one of those things where it becomes a little bit of a challenge to do at a CTC without replicating an actual division level or corps level targeting staff, because they're going into the box to go prosecute targets in support of, the initial push of the brigade.
Yeah.
And they're quote unquote in the division's deep. So these targets that they're all going to go hit and do call for fires on, mostly the IADs, right, to open up the airspace, things like that. In theory, all of these targets have already been pinpointed and identified based off of collection capabilities that the division's done, or the corps' done. And these targets all, literally this piece of SA-22 in this MGRS grid location has been nominated as a target to a coordination board and been this specific one, we want to achieve this effect on it because here's its significance, and by achieving effects, it will support the operation in XYZ function.
Yeah.
So all that's technically been done in scenario before RTUs go out.
Okay.
So then, they go out like we did, and it's you get your down rep. Hey, here's this target. Go out there, do call for fire, and do it in this window of convergence to support whatever the brigade's doing. So that's where we kind of miss the target development, target nomination, the weaponeering of that specific target, and we're just straight at the prosecution phase.
Yeah, so the company and the detachment level aren't participating in that. It's kind of presented to them, whereas potentially maybe if there was a special operations task force or combined special operations or combined joint special operations task force, somebody from one of those staffs would be at the division or corps level and participating in that process.
Correct. Yep.
Yeah. So that's one way you get a target while you're at a CTC. You infill either known or receive a down rep later on from your hire that says, hey, during a convergence window, you need to have certain effects on this thing in this general grid. And hopefully, you plan accordingly, do your reconnaissance, and then finalize the plan and, do all the troop leading procedures and whatnot at the detachment level. But how, as an OC, do you coach detachments to do bottom-up targeting?
That's a good question. Well, the biggest thing, obviously, and this from being an OC out here, is we're usually trying to have the role players do it in role.
True.
Because the more they see less of OCs, the more they stay in the scenario.
Absolutely.
That's obviously the goal. But I would say sometimes you do have those conversations, off to the side with one or two people, and for the targeting for them, it starts with their IPB and their development of NAIs. These are answering PIRs.
Yep.
And based off of the enemy sit temp they have currently at the time of that phase of the operation, and understanding what they should understand, what the AOB's objectives are, and then what the conventional forces objectives are. Knowing those, they should be making the assessment of these are the type targets that we should go after, or I assess that in this location, because of current troop movements or whatever, there could possibly be targets from our HPITL here.
Yeah.
And so it starts with that. And then if it's targets for them that they can't prosecute themselves organically with, staying off munitions or, hang a couple mortar rounds on it or something, or sabotage, whatever means.
Whatever they decide to go to.
Right.
Direct action.
Yes. Or just Leroy Jenkins the target and
no,
take
that never
it out.
happens. If they identify the target.
So if they do identify the target, and they realize that like they don't have the capability organically to achieve effects on it, whether it's lethal or non-lethal. Now you're starting the processes of requesting up your chain of command, and it could be dependent on whatever capabilities or assets are available to you. You know, if you have a TAC P on the ground, you're talking to him, and if they can get the air, then they're going to work up their systems and processes. And this kind of gets into the theater air control system, which is basically every component's way of submitting stuff to get fires throughout their own components.
Yeah.
But the TAC P on the ground, he could start working his stuff to do like a 1972 to try to get processed to the AOC, the Air Operations Center, which is your land component side, or your air component side. And they're the ones building the air tasking orders for the targeting cycles, air control orders, so on and so forth. So they could be working up their chain to get a dedicated sortie on the ATO. And then if, you know, there's an aviation brigade out here, because they're considered maneuver, they're not part of the air side of the house.
Okay.
So they could be submitting air mission requests through the chains to the brigade aviation element, who's going to be there with the fire cell and the command post for the brigade. And then also submitting up fire mission requests, both to possibly brigade level, if, you know, they can reach out and touch the targets you want, or reaching out to division and corps level with your strategic level fires, precision fires assets.
Yeah. So if they have field artillery or rocket artillery that can reach it or whatever, or joint munitions that can reach it. But I mean, we're talking a lot about kinetic strikes, and that's an easy thing to visualize for the targeting cycle. But you have mentioned that it is non-lethal, non-kinetic is also an option. You've also mentioned other lethal or kinetic means that might be organic to the team. Like, so don't get wrapped around like my targeting cycle has to have 155s and CAS and CCA in it. Like, yeah, I mean, go ahead, request those things. Plan in a perfect world, I'd request an A10 and I'd have that thing take it out. But realize the environment that you're in, like maybe the airspace is going to be denied. Maybe there's a more important thing for them to fly, or you're just too close to the execution where they can't dedicate that asset to you. So you might have to affect it in a different means. And then, you know, maybe you don't achieve the desired effect. If your desired effect is to destroy something, but like, you know, you could have your Charlie do some carver and figure out, okay, we can do a cyber thing on it, or we can just affect the power of it, or whatever the case is. And like, maybe it still operates, but they don't have any power, they don't have any fuel for it. So like, it's useless for a certain period of time.
Yeah, no, and you've hit the nail on the head exactly, because, you know, a lot of these targets that detachments might be targeting while they're in the box or in the rotation, after doing like the strategic level strikes to support the beginning of the, you know, defense and the counterattack for the brigade. But you're absolutely right. Like, you know, if it's like one main battle tank I see, or, you know, a small like convoy of whatever, they're not going to dedicate you assets that are like of that importance, or like aircraft, or you know, ATACMs or something like that, for like just one of those sitting out there.
Yeah.
That's definitely going to be you need to figure out how to do it organically. And you're exactly right. As an 18 Charlie, like, you know, the stuff that you're taught, and simple sabotage, maybe, you know, throwing a rock in some motor or something, or pouring sugar in a gas tank, like that's probably going to achieve the effect you want to some extent.
Thank you for listening to this episode where Dillon described how Special Operations Forces integrate into conventional and joint targeting processes, and what targeting can look like at the detachment level. In next episode, Dillon and I will go into more detail about D3A and the targeting process at the National Training Center and Joint Readiness Training Center.
Thank you for listening to Off the Radar, where RSOF prepares for conflict. Like, subscribe, and share on your listening platform. Actions will determine the outcome.